Now, the next speaker serves as Chief Data Officer for MasterCard, leading the organization's data strategy, its innovation efforts, while navigating, of course, current and future data risks. Our next speaker is called JoAnn Stonier, and JoAnn Stonier oversees the curation, the quality, and the governance and the management of this company's extensive data assets. So I'm incredibly excited to be hearing her thought on what she sees in the field of AI and humanity. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage JoAnn Stonier.
So hello, everyone. Have you had a long day? Let me ask you that. Yes, I'm seeing some nods, at least the people I can see in the front row. It has been quite a day, and I came up here with my phone on purpose because I have had, I think, a fascinating day. It has been a day where I think we have heard so many interesting thoughts, and so apologize for my phone, but I've taken notes along the way because I get to talk to you about AI and humanity. And you may wonder, as I did, how did I get this honor? Well, for me, I'm JoAnn Stonier. I was the Chief Data Officer at MasterCard up until July of this year. I now have the honor of being MasterCard's first fellow of data and AI. And before I was the Chief Data Officer, I actually was MasterCard's Chief Privacy Officer. And so as part of my gigs at MasterCard, we always designed with the human in mind. It came out of my privacy days. It came out of also the company's commitment to designing for an inclusive world. And we have a center, some of you may be familiar with it, the Center for Inclusive Growth, run by my friend Shamina Singh, some of you may know her, where we believe that we need to design for a future where everyone gets to participate. It's just simply good for the world, but it's also really good for business. But humanity is a challenging concept. And we've heard today from so many different people, even the last speaker in this room was really, really interesting, those of you who heard from her. We've heard so many different concepts about humanity. We've heard today about how machines learn. We've heard today about how children learn. We've heard today about how the brain works. We've heard today about how robots are challenged by even trying to open doors, turn knobs, stack objects, and yet this is the work that this community is doing. But humanity, in all of its glorious forms, is also quite challenging. We are complicated and complex. These headlines are just from the past 6 months. Our world is full of information. Our world is full of climactic problems. Our world is full of challenges of migration, war, smog. All of this we, as humans, are dealing with. Our world is fragmented. We have people who believe one point of view versus another. And what happens as our world fragments, it is reflected in our technology. It is reflected in our humanity. And so, my friends, what are we doing about it? I picked this quote from Kofi Annan, who's one of the Secretary Generals from the United Nations. And I would hazard to say that this is probably where many of us are. To live is to choose. But to choose well, you must know who you are and what you stand for, where you want to go, and why you want to get there. And I think from so many of the speakers, I have heard that they can answer this question very, very well for their company, for their organization, for their constituents, if they're researchers, for their customers, if they're companies. But here's my challenge. Can we, as society, answer this question as we stand here today in Amsterdam, or on the outskirts, as my colleagues from Amsterdam keep telling me we are not officially in Amsterdam. are we able to answer this point of view as humanity and this fabulous moment of AI and generative AI collide? And I would say we have multiple answers, and that perhaps is one of our challenges. So I ask you to think about this. How are we and humanity going to interact to answer this? We live in a VUCA and BANI world. What does this mean? Some of you are familiar with this business school model. We live in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, and we have been living in that for quite some time. But what has happened because of that volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity is that we have also hardened parts of our societies into being brittle and anxious and non-linear, and for some people, incomprehensible. And the challenge for that, my friends, is that if it's incomprehensible for some of us in this room, and I would hazard a guess that some of the presentations you have watched have been a bit incomprehensible for some of you because they've been highly specialized, highly targeted, highly innovative. Imagine for the people that aren't in this room, for your teams, for your colleagues, but also for parts of the globe that are not reflected yet in the conversation. And we know this. And so how are we going to bring everybody into the tent? We are creative spirits. We were created, and we are now returning the favor, and we need to be careful about that creation because we create with data. And I have been gobsmacked with the creation I have witnessed in just one day. I wrote some of them down, right? We have, just in the last session, we talked about how people who have lost the ability to speak can use their brain waves to actually now communicate through devices to feed themselves, to actually interact in ways that they could not do before. That is powerful innovation. Even though I'm in financial services, I keep saying that we are going to see the most amazing use cases in healthcare first with artificial intelligence. And I see many of you nodding. We're going to see Alzheimer research advance. We're going to see all sorts of research advance. And yet my last speaker just said, but be aware of the privacy challenge. She literally used the phrase, let's see if I can get this one right, because I was taking notes today. We have to worry about neural human rights. I found this fascinating. Neural human rights and the privacy of our own thoughts being invaded as we move forward with this data creativity. I would also argue that our point of view is really important. Are we looking at part or the whole? What are we incorporating in our models? Some folks talked about data. I care about data. I'm considered a data expert. It's my lane, if you will. It's where I enter this conversation. And we know we are missing parts of data in our solutions, in the models, and in how we are training our models, right? How we modify models. So if we know that, how are we changing that? So the outputs and the outcomes are what we want them to be. Back to Kofi Annan's quote, so we know where we are driving to. Are we getting the full picture? The last concept, one of the concepts I want to leave you with is this. Many of you have worked on knowledge graphs to organize the data that I'm talking about. And knowledge graphs are a great way for us to begin to harmonize and understand the data that we have and the data that we're missing. Except that I started reading some short stories recently, and I realized that knowledge graphs have some limitations. I put 2 books up here. They're short stories, and I apologize because they are very American in their slant. Some of you may know them, some of you may not. The first one is The Gift of the Magi. It's a lovely story. It's usually told around Christmas time. It's usually brought up. It's a tale of a young couple. They each have things that they're very proud of. She of her long, beautiful hair, and her husband of his beautiful pocket watch. She goes and cuts her hair to get money to buy him a beautiful gold chain to put his pocket watch on. And unbeknownst to her, he sells his beautiful pocket watch to buy ribbons for her hair. That is the story of the gift of the Magi. The context of the story we can do a knowledge graph of. Can we do the knowledge graph of the context, the morality behind the story? The other story, the lottery, is not so nice. The lottery tells the story of a village that has a tradition of every year, everybody in the village puts their name in a box, and everybody then, one family's name is pulled out of the box, and then from that family, one individual's name is pulled. And then that individual has the rest of the village stone them to death. And nobody in the village can remember why it is so. And yet the story continues. And the answer, it's a morality tale of following blindly traditions without questioning why. Again, the context of the story is to be a morality tale. Both of them are. One more pleasant than the other. Yes, I know. I reread the story and thought, this is a horrible story. But if we just teach the machine to read and gather the words, knowledge graph the words, knowledge graph perhaps the context, are we still getting the richness we need for the learning that we gather? I don't know. And there's probably lots of examples of this, and maybe we don't need the gift of the Magi or the lottery to actually be part of the discourse, or maybe it already is. But if it is, how is it showing up in what we're creating and the purposes that we are actually using all of these new and exciting tools for? We, as the humans, must be in the equation, and we, as the humans, must understand not just the inputs, not just the algorithmic processes, not just how we learn, not just the outputs, but all of the outcomes, and look at all of this to design for, ultimately, what needs to be, in my humble opinion, a really inclusive world. Next week, we hope that the World Economic Forum will publish the beginnings of a paper on data equity. Why? What does this mean? How do we design for everyone in our beautiful world? How do we begin to understand that the impact of data on individuals, groups, enterprises, and ecosystems is one of the ways we must answer the call of data and humanity? It is the hopeful solution. It's so that everyone's perspective is actually incorporated in the data, in how we learn, in that neural privacy that we may care about. These are all the aspects of the conversation and discourse that's happening here in Amsterdam, but trying to push it forward, get us to some common definitions so we can map out our beautiful journey together. And yes, of course, it includes concepts of fairness and bias and access and control, accountability and outcomes, which are concepts that we've heard from some of the regulatory panels from today as well. But this has to go beyond just regulatory concepts. It has to go into the very fabric of how we, as organizations, individuals, data scientists, researchers, begin to think about how are we designing for a future. I overheard some young people ask one of the previous speakers, what should I be studying? I find all of this fascinating. And I found myself not able to provide an answer either. What should we be telling our next generation how to study so that we can design for justice, for non-discrimination, for transparency, and inclusive participation? How do we study for that when so much of our work is not going to be coding anymore? It's going to be applied technology and applied results for a humanity and a human race that we don't want splintered. We don't want the people who learn and just accept all the answers. We want more inquiry. We want more dialogue. That's AI and humanity in collaboration. That's the future that I think all of us want to collaborate for and be part of, so that when I do my next set of fraud algorithms, it is inclusive. When we're looking at cybersecurity and economic growth, we are looking for all of us to participate, and that we don't accept the answers. And yes, of course, we honor privacy and fairness and access and control. This is a quote from Helen Keller, and you think about how she lived her life, both deaf and blind And she said this: the world is full of complexity and suffering. But she also said this: it is also full of the overcoming of it. And I think today, in so many of the presentations, this is what I heard. We are the overcoming of the complexity. We are overcoming any of the inadvertent suffering. We don't want the suffering. It is, in fact, inadvertent. And it is, in fact, part of our human condition. But I believe that all of us, if we are aware and we care oh so much, we are the ones that help overcome it. We are the generation that are here now at this crossroads. We are the combination of humanity and AI. Thank you very much.